On a quiet Tuesday night in 1987, something exceedingly curious happened in a house on 1114 Fountain Drive in Atlanta, Georgia. Mrs. Minnie Winston, the lady of the house, was taking a late-night bath. Her husband, William Winston, who was in poor health, had already retired for the night. When Minnie stepped out of the bathtub, she noticed that the bathroom floor was covered with splatters of a red liquid. This liquid would soon be confirmed to be human blood, while the Winstons' house would come to be known as the Atlanta Blood House in the media frenzy that followed. What really happened on that Tuesday night in Atlanta? And where did all that blood come from?
What used to be a quiet neighborhood with a retired couple living in peace is all changed tonight. The media hovering, crowds gathering around the house. They can't stop talking about it.
They said it appeared to be human blood.
About 24 hours ago, Minnie Winston noticed splotches and sprays of what may be human blood on the floors of her house, a small part of the basement, and a couple of entranceways.
They're coming up through these things here, just like a little sprinkle. Just like you see down there, just sprayed. Because see, it ain't still all over, it just sprayed. All upside the wall, all in here. All over the house. See, when I went out of here, it was all in the hall. Then there's it in my room. You can go look. It's all down there. Just don't know what it is.
When Minnie Winston saw the red liquid on the floor of her bathroom, she put on a robe and went to look through other rooms in the house. She soon realized that the red liquid was, in fact, everywhere around her. In the kitchen of her house, in the living room, the bedroom, in all of the halls, and even in the basement. Minnie woke up her husband and told him, quote, "Come look at all this red stuff coming out from the floors." The Winstons did not immediately identify the red liquid as blood. Minnie told the Atlanta Constitution, "I didn't get scared because I didn't know where it was coming from. It didn't look like blood, and it didn't smell like blood." Minnie and William Winston had lived in the house on Fountain Drive for 22 years. Minnie, age 77, was a retired schoolteacher. Winston, age 79, was retired as well and suffering from kidney problems, for which he received dialysis several times a week outside of the home. Minnie was his main caretaker, and the couple lived a quiet, regular life. They had several adult children, including a son who was a burglary detective for the Atlanta Police Department. 1114 Fountain Drive was a medium-sized, freestanding brick and wood house that the Winstons rented from the Alfred Smith Realty Company. It was built in 1945 and comprised 6 rooms in 1987. Never before had unexplained liquid on the floors been a problem in the house. Thus, early in the morning of Wednesday, September 9, the Winstons called 911. First responders were quickly dispatched, and the fire department and police arrived at the Winston house. What they found there baffled everyone. Interviews with Mrs. Winston on local television stations give an intriguing impression of the state of the house in the early Wednesday morning.
And you've been in this house 22 years, and nothing like this has ever happened.
That's right.
There is also blood in the house's basement, several splotches on the stairs, and a good bit around an old TV stored there. The Winstons called police last night when they first spotted the blood. Police came to investigate, but have no explanation for what they saw.
Red liquid was present on the floors and on the lower parts of the walls of all rooms in the house. The liquid appeared in different forms. In some places, there were mostly linear trails of spatters on the floor and along the bottom part of the walls. In other places, larger splashes of red liquid were found on the floor in various shapes. In the basement, a very large area of liquid was found. It was the police that first suggested that the red liquid might, in fact, be blood. They theorized that the blood came from a small animal, since it was only found on the floors and on the lower parts of walls. Mr. Winston bristled at his suggestion, stating proudly that, quote, "There are no rats or mice or roaches in the house," and that he and his wife did not keep any pets. Samples of the liquid were quickly taken and sent to Grady Memorial Hospital. Here, the substance was quickly identified as indeed being blood. However, to everyone's surprise, the blood was not animal blood. It belonged to a human being. This naturally raised alarms with the police, and more detectives were swiftly called to the scene. "It's an extremely strange situation," declared Atlanta homicide detective Steve Cartwright, who noted that he had not seen anything like this in his 10 years on the job. There was nothing that police could find in the house that suggested a violent act had taken place. no human remains were found in searches. William and Minnie declared that they had been alone in the house on Tuesday and had not had any visitors. Winston told that he had gone to bed at 9:30 p.m. after locking the doors and activating a security system. Minnie had taken a bath around 11:30. Neither William or Minnie had heard any intruders. Furthermore, as far as I can ascertain from video footage and the available photographs, there were no footprints or parts of footprints found in any of the blood. The total amount of blood that was scattered around the house is difficult to ascertain, but it appeared to have been quite significant. Detective Cartwright described it as, quote, copious amounts of blood in a September 10 interview with United Press. There must be some sort of natural explanation for it, said Cartwright. Even though it sounds pretty mysterious right now, once we get the facts, it will be demystified. In order to keep curious reporters and passers-by out of the house while investigation took place, the police declared the house a crime scene. After the mysterious substance was found to be human blood, more samples were taken by experts from the Georgia State Crime Lab. Meanwhile, by dawn on Wednesday, the media had taken notice of the curious situation at 1114 Fountain Drive. Reporters came to the house to interview the Winstons and investigators and get pictures and footage of the blood. Neighbors and curious townspeople also swung by the house to sneak a peek. After the first newspaper articles from the Atlanta Constitution covering the story came out, other newspapers, as well as TV stations, picked up the story. The Constitution reported receiving phone calls from California, New York, and Florida asking about the, quote, bleeding house.
Rubberneckers drove by the West Atlanta house all day.
I was just wondering if this is the place where...
Where the blood?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the place right there. Just came by to take a look.
Yes.
Interested onlookers like Alton Stevens brought his family to find the house and see it.
I like to go in and see. But they won't let anybody in, will they?
The Winstons were quite displeased with what was happening in their cozy home. William noted that nothing notable had ever happened to them before, and that this was the first time he ever had to call the police. Minnie remained skeptical of the determination that human blood was all over our house, declaring, quote, I still don't believe it's human blood. I don't care what they say. I don't know where it came from, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. People are coming out here to see it and troubling us. I haven't had any sleep today, and I probably won't get any tonight. Minnie told the Lawrence Journal, I still don't know where the blood came from, and I'm tired of all these people asking me all these questions. If anyone comes by here today, I'm not going to open my door. William tiredly remarked, I'm not bothered by it, because I'm in bad enough shape as it is. Rumors of there being a supernatural origin for the blood situation only encouraged more visitors. William George Rowley Jr., a parapsychologist from West Georgia College, visited the house accompanied by a reporter. Happily for the Winstons, their police officer's son was there to turn them away. While the Winstons were besieged by public interest, the police were still trying to figure out where the blood had come from. Initially, they suspected that the blood came from William Winston. William had been undergoing dialysis and was in poor health. Perhaps he unknowingly had an open wound or blood vessel and spread the blood when walking through the house before going to bed while Minnie was taking a bath. However, William and Minnie disputed this. They also declared that William never went into the basement because it was difficult for him to use the stairs. This hypothesis was soon also proven impossible when the results of the test from the Georgia State Crime Lab came back. It had confirmed the Grady Memorial Hospital's assessment that the red liquid was indeed human blood, and had further determined that its blood type was O. Minnie and William both had blood type A. Unfortunately, police detectives had waited quite long to call crime lab experts to take samples. They had waited 13 hours after first arriving at the Winstons' house. For that reason, most of the blood had already dried. Crime lab detective Larry Howard declared that a more complete analysis could have been performed on wet, fresh blood samples. According to Howard, fresh blood could easily reveal sex, race, and traces of drugs or alcohol. If we have to work with dried blood, he said, an analysis can take at least twice as long. It's harder, for example, to separate red cells from dried blood. If we're looking for drugs, we're not interested in red cells. The long wait was not according to normal procedure. In their defense, the police claimed that they had delayed contacting the lab because they believed the spots to have been animal blood. They also had cause to doubt whether the substance was blood at all. So police first sent a sample to the hospital and only contacted the state crime lab when the blood was determined to be human. The police might be afforded some sympathy here, since this was a very unusual situation. Nothing at all about the scene in the Atlanta house was normal procedure. The police couldn't even determine if a crime had been committed, and there were no leads at all to be found. The only real clue was the location of the blood, on the floors and on the lower walls, and the direction of blood spatters. Ted Staples, a forensic serologist, suggested that it looked like the blood was projected out of something or shaken off something. On Saturday, September 12, Homicide Squad Commander Lieutenant Horace Walker noticed that the police were still looking at the case from the standpoint of a criminal investigation, because, he said, usually where there is blood, there is a body. However, the case had been given a lower priority since there was no evidence of a crime. It could be a homicide, it could be a hoax, crime lab expert Larry Howard told the Lawrence Journal. As days progressed and the media frenzy increased, the elderly Winstons withdrew more and more from its attention and seemingly went into denial. A week after the incident, William Winston claimed that the substance was not blood, but merely a red dye from a rock that had bled. 2 weeks later, he stated that it was in fact rusty water, leaking from old pipes. After the initial incident of Tuesday, September 9, no more blood had appeared in the Winston home. While police investigators had not closed the case, as weeks progressed, they afforded less and less time to it. Sergeant H.L. Bolton stated that, quote, "We have not stopped looking because we know houses don't bleed." However, he also allowed that they had found no evidence of a crime, and that was the police's primary concern. The media continued writing articles about the Atlanta blood house for some time. Almost 2 months after the incident, the October 24th edition of the periodical The Afro-American gave an in-depth interview of the case and the investigation, but could not report any new developments. And eventually, after several months, attention for the case just stopped. Years later, 2 more investigations performed by people who were not involved in the original investigation into the Winstons' bleeding house provided the last notable insights. 6 months after the day that the Winston house bled, local author Kurt Rowlett contacted Mrs. Winston for an interview, and she was willing to speak with him. At this point in time, Minnie Winston was adamant that it was not blood that had appeared in her house, but rather, quote, "rust and mud mixed with water." Echoing what her husband had once told the papers months earlier, she believed that tainted water had come up into the house through steam from a ruptured hot water heater in the basement. She declared that if the substance had truly been blood, she would not be willing to stay in the house anymore. Kurt Rowlett would publish his short contact with Minnie Winston in his book Labyrinth 13 in 2008. Rowlett wrote that while he did not believe Minnie's interpretation of the event, he understood that she needed to believe that in order to keep living in her house. He had no solution for the conundrum that the bloody house presented, and concluded that a supernatural cause might be as believable as any other. Secondly, in 1994, Rebecca Long published a piece on the Atlanta blood house in the electronic newsletter of the Georgia Skeptics. Long wrote that she and a few other skeptics went to the Atlanta Police Department's Homicide Division, where they met with Lieutenant Walker, who had been part of the initial investigation. He allowed them to review police files, color photographs of the scene, and answered questions. According to Long, Lieutenant Walker had come to believe that the incident at the Winston house was a hoax. Walker reportedly believed that family problems existed, which gave either the Winstons or their adult children motive to perpetrate such a hoax. He suggested that the Winstons conceivably had access to blood because of William's dialysis, and may have perpetrated the hoax to receive more attention from their children. Or, alternatively, he suggested that the Winstons' daughter, who worked in a hospital, had access to blood, and that the Winstons' children thus could have hoaxed the blood, perhaps to have their parents legally declared incompetent for financial reasons. According to Lieutenant Walker, to spare the Winston family further embarrassment, the police did not pursue the matter further. While these claims are very intriguing, it must be noted that Lieutenant Walker has made no official public statement. These hypotheses come to us second-hand from Rebecca Long, who has published them only in an electronic newsletter and provided no supporting evidence. Thus, this information can only be considered speculative. So, the main question in this curious tale remains: How did the blood found in a Winston's home get there? This question will likely remain unanswered. However, through reviewing the known facts, we might be able to deduce a likely scenario. Two main theories have been purported for the Atlanta Blood House incident: that the cause was supernatural, or that the cause was not supernatural but human, and possibly a hoax. The hypothesis that supernatural events underlie the incident was popular from the very beginning and is still popular in retellings of the story today. Usually, ghosts or poltergeists are named as the perpetrators. The problem with pointing to supernatural explanations of curious incidents, however, is that they cannot be proven to be true. And at the same time, they cannot be proven to be false either. If this is a belief that one holds, there is nothing in this video that will persuade you otherwise. All we can do is note that the Winstons declared that they had never experienced anything odd or supernatural in their house before the blood incident. Make of that what you will. If we consider that the cause might have been human action, we must take into account the few known facts. 1. That the blood was human and did not match the blood type of either of the Winstons. While it is possible that a laboratory made a mistake or misplaced a sample, the substance from 1114 Fountain Drive was tested by 2 different institutions that both concluded it was human blood. 2. That no body or body parts were recovered in the home or its direct surroundings, and there were no signs of a violent crime committed in the home that may have been the origin of the blood. Additionally, William claimed that he had turned on the alarm at night and that no intruder could have entered the house because of this. However, this has not been verified by police as fact, so there is a possibility that the alarm was not on when Minnie was in the bathtub. Perhaps William forgot to turn on the alarm that day, perhaps Minnie turned it off by accident or on purpose, or perhaps an intruder managed to turn off the alarm without the Winstons realizing. We simply do not know. Lastly, as mentioned before, it does not appear that someone had left footprints in the blood. However, this too is not verified as fact by the police and could be incorrect. The only hard evidence in the case, when it comes down to it, is the blood itself. Because good samples were not collected until it had already dried, only the blood type is known, type O. But the shape of the blood and its location can give us one small but important clue. Both Winstons have at times suggested that the blood, or as they would identify it, the red liquid, had come up from below into the floor and the lower parts of the walls. Perhaps not unsurprisingly, since a large area of pooled blood was also found in the basement, partly underneath a water heater. However, forensic serologist Ted Staples stated that, quote, "It looked like the blood was projected out of something or shaken off something." I've compared the blood traces seen in the television reports in the house to expert literature on blood pattern analysis, namely the book Bloodstain Pattern Analysis by Tom Bevel and Ross Gardner. At least 3 variations of blood in the house can be seen in television interviews. The first is pooled blood in the basement, which unfortunately gives us very little information. Secondly, there are areas of blood that classify as splashes of blood in blood, meaning blood that has dripped or gushed into other blood. This suggests the source of the blood spatter was relatively unmoving, while blood gushed or splashed down on top of blood that had already reached the floor. Thirdly, and most notably, along many floors and the lower parts of walls, there were linear patterns of cast-off bloodstains. These bloodstains were mostly elliptical, and some had satellite spatters. That means that a bloodstain has a tiny secondary bloodstain next to it. The presence of cast-off patterns is quite interesting, as cast-off patterns are defined by Bevel and Gardner as, quote, "stains created when blood is flung or projected from an object that is in motion or an object that suddenly stops some motion." Imagine, for example, a bloody baseball bat that is swung up and down. Because the cast-off bloodstains are elliptical and not round, they also allow us to determine the direction they came from. The most blunt part of the ellipse is where the blood droplet first touches surface. The cast-off spatters on the floors and the lower parts of the walls of the Winston house appear to have come from above, mostly diagonally above, sometimes at a straight angle. Thus, it appears that serologist Ted Staples was correct in his assessment. The cast-off blood spatters suggest that a person, or perhaps multiple persons, were moving through the house room by room, swinging or shaking an object that was either covered with blood or filled with blood. This left cast-off blood spatters on the floors and the walls. It's also likely that in places where the, quote, splashes of blood in blood were found, a person stood still for a while, long enough for the blood to drip mostly downwards onto the floor and form a larger area. The pooled blood in the basement cannot give us any more information, but if a human being put the other blood patterns in the house, then surely they must also be the cause of that one. This does open the possibility that the blood in 1114 Fountain Drive was put there deliberately, possibly as a hoax. Alternatively, we could believe that a very wounded intruder entered the house and walked through all the rooms, either swinging an object filled with blood, or perhaps his or her severely wounded hands and arms, stopped in the basement long enough to create a pool of blood, and then either left or passed away while the Winstons got rid of the body immediately. This seems highly unusual. However, we should note that people under the influence of hard drugs have done some very unusual, self-harming things. Of course, for an intruder to enter the house, we would also have to assume that the alarm was turned off and that Willie was mistaken about it being turned on. So what if the Atlanta Bloodhouse incident was a hoax? The Georgia Skeptic Society certainly seems to think it was, and the Atlanta police may indeed agree with them. Who would be the perpetrator of the hoax? The most likely suspects would be the elderly Winstons, who lived in the house and had full access, their adult children or other family members who had access to the house, or a local, known or unknown to the Winstons, who managed to get into the house on that Tuesday night, who did this out of mental illness or perhaps for their own amusement. Unfortunately, there is no hard evidence pointing in any of these directions. The crux of the matter is where the blood came from. William Winston was on regular dialysis. What does that mean, that he took home a few liters of someone else's blood from his local clinic without anyone noticing? And even if the Winstons had a daughter who worked in a local hospital, does that mean that she was free to take blood without anyone sounding the alarm? If the perpetrator was a stranger, then it is of course impossible to know how they may have acquired the blood. If I had to point to a most likely suspect, I would consider either one or more of the Winstons' children, or the Winstons together with one or more of their children, simply because they were the people who had the best access to the house, and because I'm not sure if William and Minnie could have arranged to get the blood and then to spread the blood all by themselves. It might be noted that two people with blood type A, like Minnie and William Winston, produced children with either blood type A or with blood type O. The source of the blood in the house could thus theoretically be one of their own children. Any motive remains a mystery, unless we assume that the goal was just to get widespread attention. William and Minnie seem to have gotten genuinely sick of the media attention rather quickly, however. The Winstons did not own their house, but rented, so if one or more of the children had staged the hoax to have them declared incompetent, as Lieutenant Walker speculated, they would not gain control of the house. The Winstons were not wealthy people, which makes a financial motive for the children somewhat less convincing. And that is all we know today about the house on Fountain Drive that was mysteriously covered in blood on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday in 1987. We'll probably never know what really happened that day. William Winston passed on 2 years after the incident. His wife Minnie outlived him for a long time. She died in 2015 at the remarkable age of 104. May they both rest in peace. If anything, they have left the world a truly intriguing riddle, and that is a wonderful thing. So, what do you think happened in the Atlanta Bleeding House? Feel free to let your thoughts run wild in the comments below. As you can see, this is the first video on this channel, and I hope to make many more in the future. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you soon.